Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Commissioner and panel. I attended the prayer breakfast this morning, and seeing the Commissioner here in this special time of season reminded me of life's two certainties of death and taxes. But, I think there may be...
I'd like to note we're the tax part of that.
I'll leave that one alone, but there may be a third part of... there may be a new certainty in life, and that is that your personal identifiable information is going to be stolen at some point. When the current authentication framework was being developed, the National Institute of Standards and Technology informed the IRS that a taxpayer identification number was an acceptable form of identification. Now, I'm going to get real acronym heavy here because as slow as I talk, there won't be any time to answer if I didn't use these acronyms. In August 2015, NIST informed TIGTA that a TIN is now not an acceptable government identification number for the purpose of authentication. IRS agreed with this update and indicated the agency would take steps to conform to NIST standards. So my first question is, when and how did NIST initially inform the IRS that a TIN was acceptable?
It was accessible?
Was acceptable.
It was acceptable, again, when the programs were developed in 2011 and 12. It was part of a general framework. I'm not aware of a particular NIST approval. NIST sets out standards that we're obligated to and do follow. It doesn't necessarily, that I'm aware of, do reviews and respond to particular questions. But we did, through the IG, understand that NIST's view by last summer was that by that time, because as you noted, so much personal information has been stolen and in the hands of criminals, by itself a taxpayer identification number was no longer acceptable. And by that time, we had taken the GET transcript down.
All right, so it was in 2011, you said, when it was?
2011 and 12, when we designed the system, taxpayer identification numbers and out-of-wallet questions were being used by a range of financial institutions and others for authentication.
So what steps have you or the IRS taken with this communication you've had with TIGTA to conform to the NIST standards? Are you saying you're not aware that they're...
No, we've in light of that and our experience, have taken down the GET transcript application, the IP PIN application. We are in the process right now of testing a multi-factor authentication process that will require taxpayers to identify themselves through an additional factor. They will have to, we'll communicate with them with their cell phones or smartphones or other devices that we've not had access to before, and they'll have to come back through with a PIN and identifier, reinforcing all the other information they'll still have to provide us. That system we hope to have up in the next 2 or 3 months, perhaps earlier, and that will in fact be at the highest level, the appropriate high level that NIST now has out there. It's called multi-factor authentication.
Okay, and Mr. George, is the current authentication framework compliant with NIST standards? And if not, does that mean that other online services such as online payment agreement, direct pay, and where's my refund are more vulnerable to compromise?
They're vulnerable to compromise, but the impact on the taxpayer is not the same. If someone wants to find out where their refund is, it won't affect, even if it's an impersonation type of situation, that won't affect the amount of money involved here. I mean, they might get additional information that ultimately could be misused if one of the factors that to authenticate who the taxpayer is what was your refund last year.
But you can't access the app without knowing what the refund was. Right. Basically, it's a good point because authentication depends on the nature of the risk. Our assumption is if you're going to pay us on an online payment agreement, you're unlikely to be a criminal. Criminals usually don't send us checks. Right. If you're checking for a piece of information like where's my refund, you don't get any. You have to actually know what the refund is that you're asking about. You can't just go in and say, if I got a refund coming, you have to put all of your personal information in, and you have to identify the exact dollar amount of the refund to find out where it is. We had about 250 million hits on that app already this year. Those people used to have to call.
Now, keep in mind also, and this should have been stated at the outset, there's the figure of 700 or 400,000, 800,000. That number is not accurate because if someone gets access to information under the Get Transcript application when it was up and running, they also have access to dependent information and spouse information. So that number could be exponentially higher in terms of potential victims of identity theft or any other taxpayer mischief. And then ultimately, again, and I'm glad that the commissioner and he and his staff have been extraordinarily cooperative, Congressman, but the IRS simply misjudged the risk of the processes that they had in place when they first instituted the Get Transcript program. They thought it was at a very low-risk endeavor, and it obviously turned out not to be the case.
Yield back, Madam Chair.